So I was asked this evening to share Schneider's experience and Schneider's story around digital transformation. For folks who don't know Schneider, I'll talk about Schneider in just a little bit. But show of hands, just so I get a measure of audience, how many people are more from the industrial sector? Okay, so I was told not to assume that. And probably a fair expectation that people know mostly AI and the vernacular? Okay, fantastic. So what I'm going to do today is share a little bit of our story and build on these assumptions, and what I hope towards the end for it to be a conversation. As I was telling at my table, I'm here to learn so much, not to preach, but this is just an experience that I'm here to share. So would you be surprised if I told you 70% of recently interviewed IT executives are really looking forward to apply AI in their projects today and are super excited about doing that in the next 2 years? I don't expect you to be surprised. But what you probably are surprised is that 16% of those people actually have a strategy to do it, right? So AI is this thing where everybody says, you know, the rise of the digital economy is here. You know, we're talking about AI, fantastic, but in some corners and not so much in the other corners. And then 38% of the people interviewed said that AI and AI-driven initiatives have a great potential to increase the profitability in their organization. Fantastic. But guess what? The same people are not even using 10% of the data that they're generating today. So guess what? The opportunity is huge. What we're standing here today in this venue is with people that I suppose are going to guide us, and we together can collaborate to leverage the present and the opportunity that's facing us. So when we look at the opportunity and at the intersection of AI and IoT, which is what the topic I'm speaking about, there's really at least 4 facets or dimensions that I'd say I'd like to remind folks about. The Internet of Things, obviously, people talk a lot about Internet of Things. That has been enabled because of the sort of the macro trends, if you will, the ubiquitous availability of sensors and low costs of sensors. Great, we can put sensors on everything and gather a whole lot of data. Everybody walked into the room with a smartphone, and you know, you have the smartphone with you, which can act as a sensor, but it can also provide a lot of information to this building about your presence, maybe provide you some value-added services with it. But with all that data that we're talking about generating, the compute power, the cloud, the analytics, the cybersecurity advancements are the reason why Internet of Things is really flourishing, whereby all of us are starting to wear wearables, the cars are starting to get connected and probably autonomous soon. But a whole lot of this information is really an enabler, and unless you translate the information to value, which is where the AI and the ML, machine learning come into play, is where the difference is going to be from a data swamp, if you will, to more of a value-oriented data that we'll talk about here. And then, you know, augmented reality, particularly in our space where we're talking about industrial environments, this whole advancement in you know, rich immersive user experiences are helping our customers, our solutions really become sticky, really add tremendous value, and provide the insights that people are looking for. So these are the foundations on which the opportunity is there for us to avail. Just a little quick note about Schneider. So you can see we have a very global, so to speak, play. We work in 4 different industries across the global market, whether it's buildings, data centers, industry, which is process automation, as well as the smart grid and infrastructure and utilities. So across all these segments, we get a good view of a lot of different scenarios for IoT and AI to work together. And you know, as a large company, we invest a lot of our revenue into R&D, and the fundamental objective there is to really solve customer problems by leveraging AI and IoT to provide operational efficiency as well as energy efficiency. Because we in the business of energy management and industrial automation are sort of facing these mega trends as well of urbanization. Folks might or might not know, by 2050, between now and 2050, 2.5 billion people more are going to move into cities. Folks, that's like adding 10 New York cities every year for the next 30 years. Okay, so that's the people moving into the urban sectors, right? We're talking about industrialization. Everything is getting industrialized and automated. We're talking about digitization. Everything that we do is digitized today, which all means it's going to consume energy. We're talking about a huge need for energy, and therefore energy efficiency measures to kind of cap that down, have the right measure of renewable mixes, this, that, and the other. So all of it requires a good combination of AI, IoT, to bring operational efficiency as well as energy efficiency into the mix. And so how do we do it all? We do it as a digital company. We're at the core a digital company today. 50% of our revenues come from some IoT-centric services, products, and solutions. So what I'm going to share today is 6 foundational layers of foundational pillars, if you will, that provide this opportunity for us to bring intelligence into our systems, to leverage AI and IoT. And fundamentally, these are kind of segmented into 2 things: platforms, which is the team that I belong to and drive product strategy for, as well as the community view. So at the core of the platform is our IoT architecture that I'll touch on in just a minute. The second pillar is what we refer to as the edge. Edge is a very familiar term today to most people. It's sort of at the, people know about the cloud, and then the edge at the physical layer, where we're seeing a lot of compute starting to become available. But guess what? That's also the place where the IT world meets the OT world, right? And at the convergence of that IT and OT is where IoT is sort of allowing us to bring AI and really create value, which is where Schneider's strength is as well. Schneider also is really good about providing a sort of a strong lifecycle management. What does that mean? It means the CapEx world, which is about building systems and designing systems, and the OpEx world, which is about operating systems and maintaining systems. Sort of this whole life cycle, if you will, requires a set of capabilities and services that we're good at and applying AI into as well. On the community side, we have a suite of what we call as advisor services that I'll talk a few about, that essentially allow us, remember I mentioned we're in the energy management and the automation space, allow us to sort of look at maybe what's your energy spend, what are the options you have to apply information about how you're using energy through AI and optimizing those solutions, as well as maybe assets. You may have physical assets. How can you monitor the health of those assets? How can you leverage information about how you use the assets to build preventive and predictive maintenance kinds of solutions? And then we have a very deep set of expertise in the various segments that I touched on before. And last but not least, the open partner ecosystem. We know, and I think many of us in this room know, you can't do it alone. Matter of fact, it's a great reminder for you to speak to the person right next to you. You may have a complex or a simplified value chain, but guess what? There's 2 people on both sides of your value chain that maybe are sitting right next to you. So don't waste this opportunity. So speaking of the architecture, very quickly, I mentioned this because this was a key transformational element for us, allowing us to have success in the IoT and the AI space. So I mentioned we're a pretty large company, about 500,000+ sites globally. And these sites have what we call as smart connected products. These are what make your buildings, your factories smart. You connect them, and that's the source of data, right? In fact, I remember the times when we used to talk about IoT, when talking about Schneider. Schneider's been doing IoT for well over 2 decades. It may not have been wireless connectivity, but it was the Ethernet connecting plant in our what we used to call as smart factories. We're talking 1990s. And these smart connected products are what have been bringing data. And for the longest time, IoT was touted as just about collecting data, connecting assets and collecting data. Well, that is a key element of it, and that's what this layer does for us. But ultimately, it's about feeding that data into a layer above, that is the control layer, that allows us to manage make the process of designing your systems, the process of commissioning your complex systems, the process of maintaining and controlling and cybersecurity around your systems in a very seamless and easy fashion, thereby controlling the costs for our customer. So this is at the physical level, and then you have at the cloud level what we refer to as the apps and analytics and services layer, which is where many of us are familiar with the cloud services, all the data management layer and the services that ultimately enable the cloud AI version of the AI that we're familiar with. And these solutions can be on-premise, in cloud, but fundamentally they support the various domains that we cater to, as well as the various segments that our solutions are in. And they all support various cybersecurity initiatives. And I mentioned this because as I discuss a few of the specific use cases, you'll kind of be able to relate to this architecture. So I mentioned that we have a pretty deep domain expertise. And what I'm hoping during this discussion, no matter whether you are in the industrial segment or another segment, you'll sort of see a pattern. And pattern obviously is a cliche term here in the AI audience, but you'll sort of see similarities with your industry as well, your segment as well, in the sense you have some core architecture, you have some core differentiators, and then that's how you're able to sort of win or leverage the AI and the IoT opportunity. So before we talk about use cases, let me kind of remind people about the traditional IoT sort of value, which is not so much in collecting the data, as I said, but it's really about translating that information into solving pain points for our customers. And many of our customers, whether it's in the energy management or the industrial sector, are talking about large, expensive assets, and they're very, very concerned about unplanned downtimes, right? High availability and limiting or bringing to zero unplanned downtimes is what is super important for them. And so in the industry sector, which is one of our sectors that I talked about, it's important to for OEMs who are key stakeholders who take a lot of the assets from various vendors, Schneiders or otherwise, and build these complex machines that are assembled on customer sites. And they have several pain points. One of the pain points being that these are complex machines that are starting to get more and more smarter. These systems are distributed geographically, globally. We're talking about thousands of such systems. And the customers are putting pressure to reduce costs, to change the cost equation from CapEx to more of a value-oriented OpEx kind of a mix. So all of these OEMs, which we're talking about hundreds of thousands of OEMs globally, are looking at AI and IoT to create this solution where they can then offer this value to our customers. So what they identified for as needs, when our product managers identified what they really need, is they're saying, hey, to do my job as an OEM and to provide information for my customers about the asset, I need to be able to track where the assets are, what information has the customer already entered about the information. And guess what? Our study showed that 90% of the people on site, spend 90%, of their time just looking for the information, let alone acting on the information. So a good way by which you can track and make that information available through IoT was quite useful. Being able to provide real-time information about these assets was super important, as well as in how are the systems doing, and then being able to take those technicians where they are with the assets they have, maybe mobility devices or whatever, and allow them to use those devices to effectively do their job, to be able to safely do their jobs, maybe leverage AR and VR kinds of systems to just point to an asset and say, what do I need to do? The IoT information about the asset has been pushed to cloud, so by pointing at the asset, I know exactly what repair needs to be done. So we talked about making documentation easily available, having IoT kinds of technologies to remotely have the information as well as securely connect you to the remote devices, as well as the AR and VR kinds of applications to make repair job easy, but also to do what if scenarios, also connect to a remote expert, etc. So that's sort of the world of an OEM, and a very well-known OEM, Somik, who actually builds the small coffee capsules that we're familiar with, used a lot of our solutions as well to sort of leverage this IoT information that was coming across these complex machines, gather that information, run analytics on the information, characterize the information, and then model the machines, the coffee machine assembly machines that they were building. And then through that, they were getting specific recommendations on how they could reduce the form factor, how they could shift from the CapEx version to a more OpEx-oriented version. And they were able to not only reduce the footprint by half, but generate coffee capsules twice as faster. Waking up in the morning and thinking that they've been able to generate coffee faster is a good feeling. So fundamentally, it's not just about IoT. It's about these outcomes. It's about taking the information, leveraging whatever tools you have, whether it's Schneider or other things, and you will see that we take a big ecosystem approach, is to effect the savings, effect the value that the customers are talking about. So that's more of an industry world where we saw a lot of technology, but ultimately, I think I said in the beginning, it's not just about technology. It's about enabling new business models, new services, and what we saw in the case of Somik and many other industrial customers is you're taking this data, this raw data that's coming out of these machines, which on in itself is probably not much value. But when you make decisions, when you make better decisions, and we talked about machines making decisions and hopefully ethically for us, but this is about really the same thing, is applying information, probably not as hazardous a scenario here, but applying that information to make better decisions, optimizing the limited workforce you have, because these OEMs may not have people in the hundreds of thousands of geographies, but then really allowing them to take this information and offer a new set of monetized digital services versus just being able to sell the physical assets. So we're seeing that transformation happen. Now, the next topic I'll talk about is not so much the cloud, but the edge. The few characteristics, if you will, of the edge are that the edge itself, obviously we all know that more and more compute power and processing power is moving to the edge, right? But the edge also have certain characteristics, which means that they don't necessarily have a strong connection to the cloud. So you have an intermittent connection to the cloud. The people that are wanting to leverage the edge don't want to pay the bandwidth of transferring all the information to the cloud. There are people on premise, particularly in our world, which are talking about critical assets. They are super concerned about privacy and data ownership kinds of things. They don't want any data to leave the premise, right? And then obviously they don't want the round trip latency of data going to the cloud and coming back, right? So the edge is now therefore emerging as an alternative to the cloud for analytics. Also, folks in the IoT world that are enabling these containerized models to be run at the edge are allowing that to become a reality. So we've partnered with Microsoft and other vendors to be able to create an edge analytics solution that actually leverages machine learning to provide some value. And I'll talk about that example, but I often get asked the question, so isn't AI and ML kind of the same thing? And this is my favorite chart that I kind of put it out there saying, there's AI is really a collection of lots of different technologies, but what I'm using here is to remind basically that ML is really about building a relationship between a lot of the data there you've amassed through connecting an IoT, and then looking at the end outcome or some target behavior and outcome, and how can you build the relationship between that data and that outcome, and then build a model to represent that outcome. So, folks here you probably can easily associate with this, is that you have this data funnel at the left, and really a pile of stuff that generates your outcomes, and then really it's sort of that, but it's not so much that, right? ML is really somewhat esoteric to some areas, but fundamentally it's about building a model using historical data, and then over time exercising the model, but also getting new data, exercising the model using the new data to get your outcome predictions, but over time also improving the model itself by saying, I am a human inspecting the output, and guess what? It needs some correction, and feeding that information back. So how does this apply in the world of Schneider and an oil and gas scenario? So I don't know how many people here, maybe folks from Texas, have seen these things called rod lift, that rod pump lift, that basically there's about 250,000 of these things, probably 33% of the overall gas extraction kinds of apparatus. But these are all over, spread out all over in remote areas, and they represent a very interesting machine. When they work great, but when they stop working, you have a huge cost impact, because you're talking about $10 million at the cost for for $1 million for about 10 days of lost output. And so the way these things are fixed when they stop is a human person looks at a performance curve, which is the top curve of an asset, and says, you know what, based on that chart, it's called these dyno cards, I think here's where the problem is. So the way we used machine learning here is to start with models that characterize many of these pumps, and then, like the machine learning chart showed up there, is used containers at the edge to continue to refine these algorithms and refine these models to tune them to the specific well. And then over time, we were able to sort of predict the failures like 2 miles deep into the well, and avoid a lot of downtimes for our customers, fundamentally increasing productivity and saving millions of dollars, but also avoiding lots of different visits. And last example I'll mention here is the UPS world. I mentioned we also serve the IT sector. In the IT sector also, there is a service industry around the UPSs that sit in lots of data centers. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of data centers that are managed by these service technicians. And what you see here is a real log for someone who's managing a lot of data centers. And you have no idea what the priority of these things. You have no characterization of a specific data center and what these alerts mean, how you would prioritize. Imagine being one of those, right? So now how can you use, then you can use AI and machine learning to characterize a specific data center, to profile it, and then for a given data center, provide the right level of prioritization so that they can hone in on the actual solution. So the gist of what we've done here is we've seen there is a value of technology, there's a value for people, and there is a value for partners, right? And the partners can be vendors, but the partners can be the rest of our ecosystem. These are system integrators and experts in the ecosystem that can bring their expertise in addition to our expertise. And what this taught us as one other key learning, which was the last pillar in the 6 digital pillars, is that you can't do it alone. You need the rest of the ecosystem to support you and work with you. And so Schneider at the Hannover Messe last month announced Schneider Electric Exchange, which is fundamentally our effort to bring a group of collaborators, a set of technologies together, and then create a market for the people that come to the exchange, and a global marketplace that fundamentally has a set of SDKs and APIs available in it, a community for people to collaborate, and a global market then that you can sell into, right? So this is somewhat logical and somewhat intuitive, but having done it in this sector and bringing this critical mass of people together is showing us real value, because remember, you can't do it alone. So I want to leave us with a couple of thoughts, and the famous Chinese proverb, maybe it's a curse, may you live in interesting times is something that's going to live with us. Just AI, the way technology and everything is rapidly moving, is going to keep our life pretty interesting. So this is a reminder we have for ourselves as Schneider to understand fundamentally the value that IoT is bringing is to bring together this IT and OT data together, but it's really supporting three different things. One is the processes that you can optimize, the products that are an outcome of these optimizations, but at the center of it is the people. Is the people that affect the change, is the people that need to be enabled through these processes and technologies. And you can see sort of at the intersection of people and products how their user experiences needs to be. But somewhat interesting also would be what are the trends that we need to be mindful of at Schneider as we think about looking ahead. And sort of this alphabet soup is what I'll use to go through a few concepts, is the first one being business context. Let's start with the business context. Let's start with the business outcome that we have in mind, and then we start building the AI and the IoT solutions that will address the business context. The user experiences. We talked about rich set of AR and VR capabilities, the immersive experiences that they are able to build. Yet, let's not forget the nuance that we need to understand who the consumers are. What is the user experience that they are expecting? Because the experience that an OEM will expect from a supervisor who's looking at the UPSs, from the person that's looking at the grid status, the power grid status are different. Their expectations are going to be different, and align the user experience to meet that. The edge, we talked a lot about the edge, and that's a lot happening at the edge. The power is moving to the edge. You're talking every day about the large companies, Alphabet, Amazon, Intel, of course, NVIDIA, Microsoft just invested. There's a lot of edge processors and edge capability that's being invested in to support particularly the AI side of the things, and much innovation is going to happen in that space. When we talk about the connectivity, LPWAN, low power WAN, really is just a representation of the connectivity layer. IoT is very special in the sense that these devices that we put out in the field require low power, high range. They use very low bandwidth and require it to be very low cost for them to be viable. So there's this special characteristic of IoT that we need to be mindful of. And on the spectrum of 2G, 3G, and low power technologies, probably you guys have heard of Sigfox and LoRa and NB-IoT and LTE, and then you got the 5G. There's this spectrum of capabilities with various innovative efforts that are going on that we need to be mindful of. I'll also mention in the context of data, three key pillars. One is ethics. There was a mention of ethics in the sense that you want to be fair. You want to be transparent about how you're using the data. What are you collecting about me? How are you managing it? How are you using it? And how are you going to destroy it? Be transparent about that, but also be able to show garbage in, garbage out, right? So you need to be able to show how your data came about, who touched it, when it was touched, and then be able to audit that information, because the decisions are going to be affected based on the quality of the data and your ability to explain the quality of the data. And last but not least, I'll remind, it's going to be a collaborative world where no one person, no one vendor is going to solve the AI and the IoT intersection problem. It's going to have to be a collaborative system. Thank you.